On first down, they hand off to Marlon Mack. Huge hole, 50-yard line. He's at the 40, still going near sideline. He's at the 10. He's at the 5, and he will score. Touchdown, Marlon Mack. Touchdown, I-N-D-Y. And again, it's picked off. It's Darius Leonard. Leonard with a second INT, and he's streaking down the near sideline. He's at the 40. He's at the 30. He's at the 20. He's going to go. A pick six for the Maniac. Kenny Moore gets to Deshaun Watson. That's a sack for Kenny Moore. Kenny has a pick and now a sack in the game.
Horseshoe is back, baby. The horseshoe is back.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Bring the Juice podcast. I'm your co-host, Derek Larger, and with me, as always, is Cody Felger. Cody, how you doing today?
I am doing well, Derek. Thank you for having me on another episode, man. It's a good day. I'm excited to bring my kind of list here of my updated mock draft after all the free agency moves and stuff. I'm doing very well. Thanks for asking, man.
Oh, no problem, man. Yeah, and like you said, today we're going to be discussing Cody's first Colts mock draft. I know it's been a while since I did mine, and we haven't gotten Cody to do his yet, but we're going to get his today. Probably have mine sometime next week. As everybody has seen, the NFL draft is still uncertain about what the actual date is. Roger Goodell is still adamant on getting the draft done in late April, despite a lot of people saying they should move it back. We're just going to plan for whatever comes. And now that we have a much more clear idea of what the Colts draft is going to look like, now that we know they don't have a first rounder, it is time to break down the players that Cody thinks are going to get drafted by the Colts this upcoming season. So Cody, go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. And this is something, man, where I had my mock draft before the Colts traded the 13th pick away, and I was feeling pretty good about it. And then when they got Buckner, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to completely redo this entire draft. So it took me a couple hours to sift through all the prospects and kind of give my look. I looked at different people's kind of thoughts on different prospects and stuff, and kind of thinking, first off, I don't just want to put somebody on, if they're projected to be around there. I don't want to just have a guy there because he's available. I kind of want to look at, potential guys that fit into what the Colts have done, and also, Chris Ballard's draft history. Kind of want to look into that. So the first guy here, and this is obviously this draft that I have here, is with the caveat that the Colts don't trade away one of these picks here. So if the Colts stay pat in all of these picks, this is kind of where I stand on these draft picks and kind of where I think the Colts could go at those positions. So I'll start here with the Colts' first pick in the second round here at number 34. I think it's the biggest need on defense, especially with trading away Pierre Desir. So I have the Colts taking Trayvon Diggs, corner out of Alabama. He's a guy that's 6'1", 205, so he's got that elite size for a corner. Interesting enough, I read that he was a converted wide receiver. He was a wide receiver in high school, and they converted him to corner. So he's a guy that's actually really good in terms of when the ball's in the air. He's a good ball hawking type of corner, a guy that plays the ball well in the air. He's a guy, man, that I looked at kind of some of the stats. He was targeted 50 times in 2019. He only allowed 15 catches out of all those. He allowed a passer rating of 16.3, which is obviously insane. Some of the issues that he might have, some of the issues that would maybe drop him to the second round there for the Colts at 34 would be some technical stuff, kind of similar to what we saw with Rocky Sin last year. Just some technique stuff. He gets a little bit handsy at times, but just a lot of refinement in the league, which I think is a lot of what we saw with Rocky Sin last year. Some of his struggles a little bit were technique things, and so I think that's the biggest knock on him. But he played with Alabama, played against some very good teams, very good offenses, and he really played really well. And so, like I mentioned, it makes a lot of sense for me with the release of Pierre Desir. And it addresses, I would argue, with obviously trading away for DeForest Buckner, I would say that's the biggest need on defense right now. So I think you knock that off with your first pick there in the second round. You don't really have to worry about it. Then you have a pretty solid corner group there. with some young guys, Rocky Ya-Sin, Kenny Moore, Marvell Tell. Who knows about Quincy Wilson? Then you add a guy like Diggs. I mean, that's a really good young corner group there with a lot of potential there. So I like Diggs there at 34. One thing that I thought was interesting from him, he has a really long arm length. It's actually longer than Rocky Ya-Sin's, but not as long as Marvell Tell's. So it's kind of in between. It's 32 and 6/8 inches. So he has the right arm length for a guy that Chris Ballard would look for there. He kind of fits the mold as far as size and just kind of overall the type of corner that the Colts need in this defense. And so he fits the mold for me there at 34. For number 44, I'm switching over to the offensive side here, and I'm selecting a wide receiver. That's arguably the biggest position of need right now, at least immediate need for the Colts. And I'm selecting Clemson wide receiver T. Higgins. And the reason I'm doing that is because of the recent news that Devin Funchess will not be returning with the Colts. I thought maybe you address Funchess and you can, if you re-sign Funchess, you can address another position here at 44. But I'm going to stick with Higgins here. I think this move just makes sense on a lot of levels. First off, this guy's been productive with Clemson. The last 2 years, he's had double-digit touchdowns. Last year, he had over 1,000 yards. He's a major red zone threat. The Colts obviously lost 2 big red zone threats with Funchess and then Eric Ebron leaving in free agency to Pittsburgh. And also, just the connection with Phillip Rivers. You kind of look at some of the guys that Phillip Rivers has thrived with in the past with the Chargers. Big body guys, red zone, vertical threat guys like Vincent Jackson, like Malcolm Floyd, and now most recently Mike Williams. Big guys that he can just throw the ball up to. And we know Phillip Rivers likes to throw those 50-50 jump balls and let his guys go and make a play. And Higgins is a guy that is exactly his game. I mean, he's a guy that goes up and gets it.
Yeah.
A big red zone threat there. I think it makes a lot of sense on a lot of levels. And the interesting thing is he's a good route runner, but I feel like similar to Paris Campbell last year, he needs to just continue to develop his routes. I think that would be maybe a slight knock on him, is just continuing to develop a full NFL route tree. One thing that I love about him is he has really good hands, which Colts fans know last year with Devin Funchess and Eric Ebron, they were big red zone threats, but that was the biggest knock on both of them was their hands, lots of drops. And T. Higgins has very good hands. And let's just think about this for a second. When is the last time the Colts have had a game-changing red zone threat at the wide receiver position? I honestly can't think of the last time. I mean, I wouldn't say there was a guy or big red zone threat in the Andrew Luck era. I would not say there was one in the Peyton Manning era. It's been a long time since the Colts have had a receiver like T. Higgins could give you there. But, he falls to 44 for me because he's not the fastest receiver you'll ever see. I think there may be some questions on he's 6'4", but how athletic is he? A few questions there, but, he's just something I think that some of his knocks, especially, the developing a full route tree, are stuff that are teachable, just stuff that'll come over time with Higgins. And he's a guy, man, that you can, plug in there with T.Y. Hilton, Paris Campbell, Zach Pascal, maybe Reese Fountain or Ashton Doolin. And then if you have T. Higgins, I mean, if everybody's able to stay relatively healthy, which was here, man, that's a wide receiver group. And it's a major, major upgrade from what they had last year where nobody could get open. You couldn't really rely on anybody. And I just think that makes sense, too much sense for me there at 44 with T. Higgins. So at this point, in my opinion, you've addressed the 2 biggest needs on your offense and your defense. And in the third round, I'm probably going to go get back to the offense here because I think the offense needs more help than the defense at this point. I'm going to go back and I'm going to get Phillip Rivers, another weapon. And I'm going to go after Cole Kmet if he's still there at 75. I'm not sure if he will be, but if he is there, I'm definitely taking him. If he's not, I'll probably take Bryson Hopkins out of Purdue. So one of the Indiana tight ends I'll probably take there in the third round. And it makes sense because you look at the Colts tight end position right now. Obviously, I mentioned before, Eric Ebron left in free agency, signed with Pittsburgh. He was a big red zone threat. Say what you want about Eric Ebron, but he stretched the defense and he gave defensive coordinators, nightmares. as far as matchup problems. And I think you just need another guy that can do that. And I think Cole Kmet is definitely arguably the best tight end in this class. And it makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways because you look at that tight end group, you have Jack Doyle, who I love Jack Doyle. He's a reliable target, but let's be honest, he's not a guy that you're really like terrified of if you're a defensive coordinator. He's a guy that's going to be reliable, but he's not a guy that's going to take the top off of a defense. Mo Alley Cox, who's another guy who's pretty young, really good run blocker, but he just has not shown a ton yet in his career as far as receiving threat goes. He's got the size, he's got the ability, he just hasn't put it all together yet. And you could argue quarterback play was a reason last year, but I just think it makes sense to do that, to have a guy, man, that defensive coordinators are planning for. Like, how do we stop Cole Kmet? How do we stop Bryson Hop? How do we stop one of these guys? I think it makes a lot of sense there. And, he's 6'6", 262, so he is definitely going to be a matchup problem. And we know, Derek, after we've seen Frank Reich in his offense the last couple of years, especially in 2018 with Andrew Luck, he loves those two tight end sets. He loves them a lot. And adding a guy like Cole Kmet, he just gives Philip Rivers more weapons. He helps free up some of your wide receivers, who we know that's been an issue with the wide receivers. They could not get open. So he gives, he helps everybody out on that offense. And I think it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I'm going to go with the assumption that Kmet's there at 75. If he is not, then I would probably take Bryson Hopkins out of Purdue, and also pretty good receiving threat there. So, so at this point through my 3 rounds, I've addressed the offense twice, the defense once. I think arguably, outside of quarterback, for immediate needs that you need this offseason, absolutely, I would say I've addressed now the top defensive need and the top 2 offensive needs. And so that's through 3 rounds here. So I'm going to go now moving to the 4th round. Going to look at beefing up that offensive line depth a little bit. And that's something that we've talked about on this podcast. The Colts losing 2 of their top reserve offensive linemen to free agency. They signed into different places. I can't say I blame them. They want a chance to start. Totally makes a lot of sense to me. But for me, I'm going to go look at some offensive linemen, and I'm going to actually go look at an offensive tackle, and that's Matt Peart out of UConn. He's 6'6", 318 pounds. He's got super long arms, like 36.5-inch arms, which is blue chip talent. That's the type of player that Chris Ballard loves, and that's kind of what we've seen in the past with some of his selections, dating back to Kansas City with Eric Fisher. Looking at Braden Smith, looking at even Zach Banner, a guy who's a kind of a physical freak type of player. This move makes sense because I obviously mentioned Joe Haig, Josh Andrews. They signed other places. We know obviously the uncertainty around Anthony Costanzo. He signed a 2-year extension, so you think you have a little bit of buffer room. But the offensive tackle depth is definitely a concern and a question mark. And Peart's the kind of guy that you would consider a Mauler type guy, so he'd probably play the right tackle position. He's a really good run blocker. One of the on him is he's not a great pass protector, but he's a guy that can continue to develop behind Braden Smith. A guy that just needs to maybe take a year to refine his skills a little bit. But he's a guy that definitely has a lot of upside and a lot of potential. He's got a lot of the tools that are necessary to be a very good offensive tackle in this league. What better offensive line to sit behind than the offensive line that played all 5 starters, all 16 games last year. I think it makes a lot of sense there at offensive tackle. So I'm going to take Peart there in the 4th round at the 122nd pick. Okay, so now I'm moving over to the 160th pick here. And I'm going to flip it back over to the defensive side here. And I'm going to help that unit out by selecting an edge presence here. So in the last 2 years, we've kind of seen the Colts draft a few guys in the 2nd and then the 3rd round on that defensive line. And so the guy who I'm selecting here for the Colts, I think he's a guy that fits very well into what the Colts are trying to do here on defense. And he's just adding more juice to that pass rush department, right? It wasn't an awful unit by any means in 2019, but it wasn't a great unit. It was about smack dab in the middle there, sitting there at 15 in the league, tied for 15th in the league there. So adding another pass rusher certainly will help that position, especially with some of the question marks. Obviously Justin Houston, who we've talked about tremendous season last year, but he's getting up there in age. You wonder how much longer can he continue to put up that production. Kamoko Turi coming back from a major injury last year. And then Ben Banogu, who's he showed some flashes for you, but he's a guy, man, that, he hasn't shown that he can be consistently a disruptive force on the edge. So you have some question marks there. And then what do you do with Joe Ball-Sheard? Are you going to bring him back? Maybe you let him walk. Maybe you try to sign somebody else. It's just up in the air right now. So because of that, I'm going to add a guy, and I'm going to add a guy who's Alex Highsmith. And he's a guy, man, that, he's a senior. He's got good athletic ability. One thing that I found really interesting, of all the guys that the Colts, Chris Ballard has selected at the defensive end position, I think they were all in the Senior Bowl, so they were all seniors. And it's the same thing here with Highsmith. He's a guy that has excellent burst, excellent explosion. He's the kind of guy that Chris Ballard's looking for in terms of athleticism, in terms of burst, in terms of bend. He's looking for all those things. He's very violent pass rusher. He's got a very good motor, which I think is huge. He's got a knack also for just playing through the whistle, which I know is a big thing for Chris Ballard as well. So that's the guy I'm taking there, defensive end, adding to that defensive end position. And then at 185 here, I'm dipping back into the offensive line, and now I'm going to go back into the interior offensive line, which I think is now one of your bigger needs. And I'm taking Michael, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Onwenu out of Michigan. I apologize if I butchered that. But he's a guy who just helps with the interior of your depth there at the offensive guard center position. He's a guy that, he's pretty raw, but he's a very powerful player. And I know that that's the type of player that Chris Ballard likes to take a chance on, some of those guys who have the raw athletic ability. They just need a lot of refinement. So I'm taking him there. He's kind of in that Ballard mold of a big mauler type player. 193, I'm taking a guy here that, Derek, you mocked actually to the Colts in your previous mock draft a few months ago. And I'm going Benjamin Victor out of Ohio State, one of your guys there. He's a guy who's a big-bodied wide receiver, which obviously complements Philip Rivers well, similar to T. Higgins. He's a guy that obviously has a very, very wide catch radius as well. I think bodes well for this Colts offense. I think obviously he wasn't super productive at Ohio State for multiple reasons, and that's kind of why he's fallen here to the later rounds. But for me, it comes back to the type of receiver that the Colts are looking for with Philip Rivers, the type of receivers that Philip Rivers has played with in the past. And he's a guy, I think, who you can continue to develop. He's got those raw tools to be a good red zone threat. And I just think it makes a lot of sense there, Benjamin Victor for the Colts. And I think he'll thrive well with this kind of vertical passing offense that the Colts are going to presumably run here with Philip Rivers. So that's the guy here I have there in the 6th round. And in the 7th round at 211, I had the Colts beefing up that defensive interior and selecting defensive tackle Darian Daniels out of Nebraska. I just added him because he's a guy that I think is just another big body in the interior. You don't have a lot of those guys outside of Grover Stewart. He's just another guy that you can continue to add, continue to try to stop the run, especially if you don't sign another guy in free agency. So that is, in a nutshell, my 7-round mock draft. Do you have any thoughts here, Derek, on some of those guys you like? Just give me your thoughts overall on this mock draft.
Yeah, I kind of like it with the sense of, spreading everything around, especially towards the later ends. I think you can get some good value picks here. Trayvon Diggs is a good pickup. My only issue is I don't think he gets out of the first round. That's me personally. I've been having him in my first round mock drafts over the last month, that I think Trayvon's going to be one of the top 3 corners selected in the first round. But if he is to somehow slip to that 2nd round, oh my goodness, yeah, I would love to have Trayvon, because like you mentioned, he's the prototypical size of what a Chris Ballard likes. 6'1", 210 pounds. It's just a big body guy that can definitely get physical up front. He certainly is a bull rushing kind of corner. He definitely takes things he definitely likes to be physical, which is definitely, again, something that the Colts like in their corners. So, yeah, Trayvon's definitely a good one. At that 44, that was an interesting one for me that you selected T. Higgins. just out of curiosity, do you think Claypool goes before that, or do you think he's going after 44?
Mm. I would probably say he'd go after.
Hmm.
Um, I've seen a lot of people projecting him like a third round pick, so I'd
Gotcha.
probably say he goes after. But and I've seen some people say the Colts select him in the third round, so
Hmm.
I'm okay with either of those guys. I just have T. Higgins because I've seen the production that he's put up
Yeah.
with Clemson, and just seeing the matchup, especially with Devin Funchess leaving. He's kind of the same, type of body, and I think that's what Philip Rivers needs in terms of his wide receivers. So that's kind of why I put him there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
it's interesting because there's so many different things. Because, like you mentioned, when you're breaking down T. Higgins or Chase Claypool, which I think most people assume in that second round is who the Colts may target at 44. Some other names you can mention is Denzel Mims if he's still there in the second round.
yeah,
A couple other guys as well. But yeah, T. Higgins, a lot of people saw what he did at his pro day, a 4.52 40 time, not very good. That's not good at all when you're looking at a 40. But you mentioned just how the way he plays when you're 6'4" as a wide receiver, that's very important. And just the way he plays, he can make those contested catches. That's how he's made his production at Clemson. And you mentioned it. Philip Rivers loved Mike Williams because he could just throw it up there and then put it in a position where Mike Williams can just go up and get it over the corner. And that's what T. Higgins is very good at. So, and T. Higgins has something that Claypool doesn't. Claypool is much more athletic than T. Higgins, but T. Higgins has never really had a drop problem. And we
mhm,
we constantly keep saying every year, can we stop with the drops? Can we stop with the freaking drops? And T.
yeah,
Higgins has never really had that problem. Chase Claypool actually has had a little bit of a drop problem. I mean, it's ultimately just a matter of which GM looks at pro day numbers more than just the production. What do you look at on tape? And T. Higgins, like you said, being 6'4", 210 pounds, he's a mammoth of a guy, and he's a mismatch for 50-50 balls for almost any corner. So yeah, I mean T. Higgins at 44, if he drops that far, I'm not opposed to that. That big body wide receiver that you mentioned. 75, I think most people have the Colts selecting a tight end in this one as well. I've had a tight end or a offensive lineman going to the Colts in the third round. I would love to get Bryson Hopkins. He's a great
mhm,
a great receiving tight end, and we all know that Rivers loves his receiving tight ends. And as much as Jack Doyle can be one, he's like you said, not a take the top off the defense kind of guy. Bryson Hopkins can certainly be that. Your Alex Highsmith
mhm,
one, I just looked him up. Um, Dude, the production level of this guy from his first 3 years to his senior year, I don't care what school you came from. This kid had a massive jump. He went from 60 total tackles in 2018 with only 3 sacks to going to 75 tackles with 14 sacks. And he had a forced fumble as
mhm,
well. 14 sacks and 3 pass deflections as well. So this kid was
yeah,
very, very good last season. I don't care. Again, I don't care what school you go to. Carson Wentz came out of North Dakota State. Okay. I really don't care. It's the production you can get. And I mean, if for a fourth or fifth round guy, I mean, the production speaks for itself. He dominated in his conference,
yeah,
so that certainly does help. So that's an interesting one. I really like that sack number. It shows that he definitely has the tools to make some people miss on the outside, which is good. Then you beefed up the interior with Michael Owenu, yeah, and then really like your Benjamin Victor pick from Ohio State. My always his biggest knock on him was his first 2 seasons just had a drop problem. The first 2 seasons,
mm,
he's kind of ensured that he's kind of fixed that this last season with Ohio State. And I mean, the reason he didn't have as much production is because, Chris Olave, who is a sophomore this year for Ohio State, most likely going to be the number one receiver taken out of college next year. And Garrett Wilson, who I think was regarded as the best freshman wide receiver in the country when he came in. I mean, they had a stud, talented offensive line and an offensive weapons as well. So I mean, it's tough to get production when you have two or three other guys that are like right now could also probably be drafted if they were going to do that right now. But Victor he's very good at route running. He's very good at creating space. Not tremendous speed by any means, but again, he's that big body, has a great catch radius, just is able to high top it. He's a great route runner. And with time and just getting him fit into a system, I feel like that would be a great one. I kind of had a argument on Twitter earlier about a guy who like is adamant that we never draft another Ohio State player ever because he says Ohio State players never do good in Indy ever. So I certainly had a few words to say about that, and I'm not gonna mention it. But anyway, yeah, Victor's a good one, and Darian Daniels definitely, and like you said, another big body on the defensive tackle position. I would think probably in that fourth round, if Devon Hamilton is in there, I would really love to possibly get Devon Hamilton in that fourth round, defensive tackle out of Ohio State. Guy has a great bull rush. He's tremendous on the inside in both the run and the sacking. He actually, I think he was second on Ohio State's team in sacks last year. I think he had 6 or 7. So he certainly can get to the quarterback as well. But yeah, overall, dude, I like your mock draft. I think that there's great talent there all across the board.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, for me, it was more just looking at positions and looking at needs, looking at guys that fits Balor's mold. And it made sense to me. Now, people can disagree. That's totally fine. But it'll probably change when we come out with our other mock draft. I know you'll probably have a little bit different than mine, but yeah, I love it. I love being able to do this. It was really like my first mock draft that I've like shared with people. So very, very glad you think it's decent at least. So
yeah, I got you.
Yeah, and it's interesting. One thing I wanted to touch on, because I will probably have somebody in the comments just asking us about this. I didn't have them selecting a quarterback at all. I didn't have the Colts selecting a quarterback because of the reason that we talked about, Derek. I think the Colts right now are kind of in win now mode. I think that, Chris Ballard's kind of in the mindset right now of we have a good enough roster. We saw even in 2018 when we had an elite quarterback in Andrew Luck. I mean, we made a pretty deep run in the playoffs, and you think Philip Rivers maybe could be a top 10 quarterback if he gets talent around him. He has a good offense.